There are moments that fracture your world, moments when the pavement beneath your feet feels like it might give way. And tonight, Gregory Vale was walking through one. The city around him glittered, but he barely noticed it. His shoes, once polished to perfection, now creaked alongside the tiny wheels of a wheelchair, and the weight behind those wheels made each step feel heavier. Naomi, his 8-year-old daughter, sat wrapped in a knitted blue blanket, her blonde hair falling across her cheeks like a curtain she didn't bother to lift. She didn't look at the world anymore. She had once outrun the wind in the park, once laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. Now she sat silent, her legs still and lifeless. 2 years. 2 years since the accident had snapped something inside her spine, and no amount of money, no barrage of the world's top neurologists, surgeons, or therapists could fix it. The answer was always the same, delivered gently but cruelly. She will never walk again. Gregory had learned to hate the word hope. It had become a false god, a cruel trick played on desperate men with fat bank accounts. He still tried, of course. That's what fathers did. But each attempt had carved a little more away from him, like a river wearing down stone. Tonight he was simply taking Naomi for air, rolling her past the same alley he had passed 100 times before, never imagining this time would be different. "Uncle," a voice piped up, cutting through the heavy silence. "I know how to make your daughter walk again." Gregory stopped cold, one hand tightening on Naomi's wheelchair. He turned, expecting a scam artist, another charlatan who preyed on grief. Instead, what he saw disarmed him completely. A barefoot boy, no older than Naomi, wrapped in a coat several sizes too big. His skin was dark, his hands caked in dirt, and one eye slightly bruised. Yet his voice was steady, almost unsettlingly calm. "What did you say?" Gregory asked, wary. "I can help your daughter," the boy said again, meeting his gaze without fear. It was absurd, infuriating, dangerous. "Is this a game? Who put you up to this?" Gregory snapped. But the boy, Eli, he said his name was, only shook his head. "No one. I live behind the train station. I saw you yesterday. I waited here because I knew you'd come again." Gregory squinted, anger battling disbelief. Naomi, to his shock, lifted her head a little, her tired eyes suddenly searching. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely carrying. "Can we go?" The words "no" and "absolutely not" spun on the tip of Gregory's tongue. He had spent fortunes chasing false promises. And yet, the way Naomi's voice cracked, the tiny flicker in her eyes, the memory of her sobbing just a week ago. "I hate being this way." It broke something inside him. He knelt beside her, gripping her hands gently. "If anything feels wrong," he said, steady but grim, "we leave. Got it?" Naomi nodded. Eli smiled. Not the wide, eager smile of a child asking for candy, but a knowing smile, patient, almost ancient. He turned and started walking. Against every instinct screaming inside him, Gregory pushed Naomi's wheelchair forward, following a barefoot boy into the unknown. They passed beyond the city's bright avenues into its forgotten edges, rusted fences, crumbling bricks, graffiti stretching like scars across old walls. Naomi winced with every bump on the broken sidewalks, and Gregory's hands trembled slightly on the wheelchair handles. Twice he almost turned back. Twice Eli looked over his shoulder and smiled. A calm so profound it seemed to steady the night around them. At the end of the battered path, the city gave way to woods. An old trail wound through the trees, half swallowed by roots and time. "Through here," Eli said simply, as though leading them to the gates of another world. Gregory hesitated, but Naomi squeezed his hand, her grip firmer than he remembered, it being in months. Together they entered the trees, where the air smelled of damp earth and pine, and somewhere ahead an answer waited, one that no hospital or fortune could ever have bought. The woods closed around them, dimming the city's last glow into a misty memory. Gregory pushed Naomi's wheelchair carefully, the uneven path jarring her small frame with every hidden root and stone. Each crackle of leaves beneath the wheels felt like a drumbeat in his ears, a reminder of how insane this was, how utterly reckless. Yet every time he opened his mouth to call it off, he caught sight of Eli ahead, walking barefoot, stepping lightly, his head high like he knew exactly where he was going. And somehow, that simple, steady faith pulled Gregory forward. After what felt like forever, the trees parted to reveal a clearing. In its center stood a small cabin, built from timber so worn it looked more grown than constructed. Moss clung to the corners like old lace. A single candle flickered in the window. On the porch stood an old woman. Her hair fell in long silver braids, twisted with bits of bark and thread, and her green eyes glowed with an ageless sharpness that both comforted and unsettled. She didn't look surprised to see them. "I was wondering when you'd bring them," she said to Eli with a nod. Eli didn't speak, only smiled in a way that said everything. Gregory froze, fighting every rational instinct screaming inside him. This was madness. This was dangerous. This was something he couldn't quite name. But Naomi, little Naomi, smiled. A small tentative smile, but real. The first real smile he'd seen in months. The old woman knelt in front of Naomi, moving, with the slow grace of someone who understood that healing wasn't just about hands, but about presence. "Child," she said, her voice soft as dusk, "may I touch your knees?" Naomi glanced up at her father. Gregory hesitated. This was against every fiber of his practical, logical mind. But then he nodded. Anything that could crack that frozen sadness in his daughter's eyes was worth one more impossible risk. The woman placed her hands gently over Naomi's legs. Her eyes fluttered closed and she began to hum. A sound so low and strange, it seemed to vibrate in the earth itself. Naomi flinched. Gregory surged forward instinctively, but Eli held out a steadying hand. "Wait," he whispered. "I felt it," Naomi breathed. Her voice quivered with awe. "Daddy, I felt something." Gregory's heart slammed against his ribs. "Felt what?" he asked urgently. "A tingle," she said. "In my toes." The woman opened her eyes. "Her spine is not dead," she said calmly. "Just frozen, locked by sorrow. The body listens to the heart more than it listens to the brain." Gregory almost laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "That's not medical science," he muttered. "No," the woman said simply. "But medical science doesn't hold your daughter's tears at night." Silence folded around them like a second skin. Then Eli spoke, his voice almost reverent. "Can she try?" he asked. The woman turned to Naomi. "Only if you wish it, child." Naomi nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. With infinite care, the woman rolled the wheelchair back and helped Naomi to her feet. Gregory surged forward again, terror flashing through him, but the woman raised a hand. "Let her," she said. Naomi's legs wobbled, her body shaking like a leaf in a storm. Gregory bit his lip so hard he tasted blood. And then, impossibly, incredibly, Naomi's right foot moved forward. Then her left. One trembling, faltering step at a time, she stood. No braces, no cables, no miracle device strapped to her spine. Just a barefoot boy, an old woman, and a belief stronger than steel. "Daddy," Naomi sobbed, tears pouring down her cheeks. "I'm standing." Gregory fell to his knees in the dirt. He didn't care about his suit, didn't care about his pride, didn't care about the future. He crawled to her feet and wrapped his arms around her like she might disappear if he let go. "I've got you," he whispered, voice cracking wide open. "I've got you." Behind them, Eli stood silent, his small hands stuffed into the oversized sleeves of his coat. Gregory turned, blinking through his tears. "Who are you?" he asked, still on his knees. Eli shrugged, a small, unpolished gesture. Just a boy who believes some people can be whole again. Gregory reached instinctively for his wallet, pulling out a wad of cash. "I'll pay you," he said desperately. "Anything? Name your price." But Eli only shook his head. "I don't need money," he said, quietly. "I just needed someone to listen." Above them the clouds parted slightly, letting a sliver of late afternoon sun spill into the clearing. Naomi took one shaky step forward, her arms stretched toward her father like a tightrope walker. And for the first time in 2 years, Gregory saw it. Not just her body moving, but her spirit waking up. Fragile, shaky, fierce. She took another step, then another, then stumbled. And he caught her before she could fall, lifting her easily into his arms. "I felt my legs, Daddy," Naomi sobbed against his chest. "I really felt them." "You did, sweetheart," he said, pressing his face into her hair. "You did." Behind them, the old woman watched quietly, her hands folded in front of her like someone who had seen too many miracles to ever cheapen one with applause. And Eli, the boy with no shoes, no home, and nothing to gain, crouched beside them, his expression calm, almost solemn, as though this too was part of a much larger promise kept. The clearing settled into a heavy, tender silence, broken only by the soft sound of Naomi's uneven breathing as she clung to her father's neck. Gregory slowly stood, Naomi's fragile frame cradled against him, her legs trembling but alive, her spirit something fiery and new. The old woman said nothing. She simply stepped back, giving them space as if she understood that real healing wasn't something you touched, it was something you allowed. Gregory turned, his gaze falling back on Eli. There was no triumph in the boy's face, no pride, no expectation of reward. Only a stillness that seemed too deep for someone so young. Gregory crouched down, balancing Naomi carefully against his chest, and locked eyes with the boy. "I need to know," he said, his voice low and raw. "How? How did you know this could happen? How did you do it?" Eli looked down, tracing patterns in the dirt with his toe. "I didn't do anything," he said after a moment. "I just remembered." "Remembered?" Gregory pressed, confused but unwilling to let it go. "My grandma," Eli said softly. His voice cracked just slightly. "She wasn't a doctor, but she knew things. She knew where pain hides, and where hope goes when nobody's looking." He paused, swallowing hard, his eyes flickering with something unspoken. "I used to walk funny," Eli continued, voice barely above a whisper. "My foot was bent since I was born. Kids laughed, teachers. They looked away. My mom left when I was 4. It was just me and Grandma after that." He sniffed and wiped his nose on his sleeve. Gregory didn't move, didn't interrupt, only listened. "One day," Eli said, "she told me it was time. She didn't take me to a hospital or a clinic. She sat me down in our tiny kitchen, put her hand on my foot, and hummed." His face softened, remembering. "She whispered something in a language I don't know, and then she told me to stand." "And you did?" Gregory asked, astonished. Eli nodded slowly. "I stood. I never fell again." Naomi's small hand curled in the fabric of her father's jacket, her eyes wide and shining as she listened. "She healed you?" she asked. Eli shook his head. "She reminded me I wasn't broken." The words hung in the air like smoke, curling around. "Them, impossible to touch, impossible to deny." Gregory's throat tightened painfully. "Where is she now?" he asked quietly. Eli's gaze dropped. "Gone," he said simply. "A year ago." The world seemed to dim around them for a moment. Gregory felt the weight of the boy's loneliness in a way he hadn't allowed himself to feel anyone's. Pain in years. His empire, his fortune, his endless appointments with specialists. None of it could touch what this barefoot child had carried alone. "I tried to go into the system after she died," Eli said. They said she was a fraud, that I made it up. They called it delusional coping. So I ran. He shrugged. And I started helping people myself. Only the ones who asked. Only the ones who believed. He looked up finally, his dark eyes wide and fierce. Sometimes I fail, he admitted. But sometimes I don't. Gregory stood slowly, feeling the depth of everything that had just been given to him. Everything he could never repay. He turned to the old woman, his voice catching. Who are you? The woman smiled, soft and sad. Someone who listens, she said. Eli does the rest. But this, Gregory said, shaking his head, this is beyond anything I've ever seen. Beyond science, medicine. The woman tilted her head. Healing doesn't always come from pills, wires, or surgery, she said gently. Sometimes it comes from seeing what's invisible, from touching what can't be seen, from believing when no one else will. Gregory turned and looked at Naomi. She was standing again, wobbly, clutching the back of her wheelchair for balance, but standing. Her face was flushed, her hair wild, and her eyes were blazing. Hope. Pure, furious, undeniable hope. Gregory blinked back the sting behind his eyes. He knelt down once more, facing Eli. I want to take you with us, he said. We have doctors, specialists, therapists. I can set you up, give you a future. Eli smiled, but it was a smile heavy with a knowledge beyond his years. My place is here, he said softly. In the streets, in the forgotten corners. That's where the hurting lives. That's where people like me are needed. Gregory hesitated. Every instinct in him screamed to protect this boy, to save him. But Eli's quiet conviction stopped him. It wasn't pity Eli needed. It was trust. And if I want to help you? Gregory asked. Eli shrugged again. You already did, he said. You listened. Most people don't. Gregory fished a business card out of his coat pocket, creased and damp from the walk, and pressed it into Eli's small hand. If you ever need anything, he said fiercely. Food, shelter, education, you call this number, day or night, no questions asked. Eli studied the card, turning it over like it was some sacred object. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into the lining of his oversized coat. Naomi watched him quietly, then limped forward, slow but determined. She threw her arms around Eli's thin shoulders and hugged him tight. It was the first time in over a year anyone had hugged him. Eli froze for half a second, stunned, then closed his arms around her, blinking hard against tears he didn't let fall. As the sun broke through the clearing, washing them all in gold, Gregory realized something he hadn't understood until that moment. Healing wasn't just about bodies. It was about choosing to believe, choosing to stay, choosing to see the broken places, and love them anyway. 1 week later, the morning sun stretched long shadows across the steps of Naomi's school. Students buzzed with the kind of excitement reserved for talent shows, holidays, and small miracles. In the crowd gathered near the auditorium doors, phones lifted, ready to capture the impossible. Gregory stood off to the side, his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched his daughter, his Naomi, standing unaided at the edge of the stage. No braces, no crutches, no chair. She took a step forward. Wobbly, careful, but hers. And another, and another. The crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers loud enough to shake the banners hanging overhead. Reporters snapped photos furiously, shouting questions, but Naomi just smiled, that quiet, unstoppable smile. And when one voice finally called out, "What changed? How did this happen?" she simply answered, "A boy who believed I could." Gregory closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words sink into the marrow of his bones. It wasn't about wealth or technology or some headline-grabbing miracle. It was about belief, stubborn, patient, reckless belief. passed from a barefoot boy with dirt under his fingernails to a little girl who had almost forgotten how to dream. That same morning, 3 districts away, a different scene unfolded. In a narrow alley lined with broken brick and graffiti, Eli sat on a milk crate, humming under his breath. Beside him, a young girl, no older than Naomi, stared silently at the cracked concrete. Her hands trembled slightly, and when she finally glanced at him, the fear was plain. He didn't push. He didn't question. He simply sat beside her and kept humming. The same melody his grandmother had once whispered in their tiny kitchen. The same one that had pulled him out of darkness when the world had turned its back. Healing, Eli understood, didn't always start with medicine or machines. Sometimes it began with something far rarer, someone who refused to walk away. And so the story doesn't end here. Because in alleys, on playgrounds, across hospital waiting rooms and abandoned sidewalks, there are still those like Eli, quiet souls who see past the broken bodies, the weary hearts, and the invisible scars, who believe when everyone else has given up, and sometimes all it takes is one voice saying, "I believe you can." Stay tuned for the next chapter, because where belief lives, hope never dies.